this? Okay, perfect. It's working. The screen is working. I'm going to show you some things. I'm going to run some demos here, so I hope the technology gods will be with us. Let's see. Press the right button. First, it's great to be here. It's the first conference I've talked to where I've been in boots. It's fantastic. One of the things I've done in addition to doing tech stuff over the last year is to become a farmer. I've planted an apple orchard in Norway, where I live. I'll show you some pictures of my apples. These are real apples, not the kind of apples you have in your pockets, you know. This is real stuff. I'll show you some pictures. But first, about CSS. My story starts here. This is the world's biggest machine. It's a fantastic device. It's buried into the ground between Switzerland and France. The laboratory is CERN. This is where they do incredible stuff like detecting what the universe is made up of. All the small particles, they shoot them together. This is a picture from their detector. We're underground, and you can see the size of this by looking at this man here at the bottom. So this is fantastically advanced stuff that I don't know much about. But I know a little bit about the computers that CERN use, because there's a lot of data coming out of this detector, and they need a lot of computing power to process that data. And one of the engineers working on there in the computing department was Tim Berners-Lee. And he, to facilitate how researchers could communicate, he developed the World Wide Web. He was the one who came up with those three things that we all use every day: the concept of HTTP, the concept of URLs, the concept of HTML. I'm sure all of you write HTML code, do you? Yeah, you're nodding. And you know about CSS a little bit too? You do, perfect. Very good, excellent. So I'm going to show you some pictures just from where this started. This is from the hallway where Tim was having his office. I joined the project in 1994. So I wasn't there when Tim invented HTML and such, but I came running because I saw it early, and I thought, wow, this is going to be great. So when I came, one of the first things we did was to set up a public web terminal in the corner there. This was a time before everyone had computers. Students who came to CERN didn't necessarily have laptops with them. So having a public terminal seemed like a good idea. So I know a little bit about the corner there. I don't know much about the pipelines, what goes through those pipelines. Just a side note on the pipelines. You know, Tim had to walk to his office every day past these pipelines. And I have a little hypothesis that he actually was inspired by this. Because you know how HTML has this H1, H2, H3, right? And then you have the other ones over on the side. I'm glad you laugh. It's a joke. It's good. Perfect. Okay, so here's the corner. And here we had a little board to post messages and do some marketing campaign. I'm sure, can you see our marketing slogan? World Wide Web. You click, we do the rest. Yeah? Is it a good slogan? Was this why the web took off, our marketing campaign? I don't think so. I think the web took off because it provided people with incredible access to incredible information in other parts of the planet. And just at this time, 1994, when the browsers came out, this is a screenshot from Mosaic. Any Mosaic users in the audience? You're too young. There's normally one in every room. No? Okay, you're young. Okay, that's good too. So Mosaic was it was the first graphical browser that came out, made by Mark Andreessen, amongst other things, who went on to found Netscape. But this is what Mosaic looked like in 1994. And it was just incredible to know that the blue text with underlines, you could click, and you could be taken to another document on another machine in another part of the world. That was just mind-boggling, and it worked. You had to have a Unix workstation, and you had to have an internet connection, and those weren't everyday items in the 1990s, but enough people had it, and enough people saw it so that this spread. So this was just, incredible. And all the people it attracted, they came to it from other backgrounds. They weren't necessarily physicists or researchers or writing their PhD thesis. These were designers and authors and everyday content creators. And one of the first things they asked about, how can I change the color of the background? How can I, remove I don't like the underline, how can I remove that? And the answer to that was, well, there is a setting in your browser that can do it. And they said, no, I don't want to change it for me. I wanted to change it for all the people who read my page. And the answer was, no, you can't do that. HTML had no concept of underlining or colors. So that's part of my background that I'll be telling about how I came to this. Because we all know, let me try to avoid that annoying little, let me see if I can just get rid of that annoying little thing. There we are. Okay, so HTML, as we know, very simple language. You can explain it to someone in about 60 seconds how that has, a start tag that has these funny brackets around it, and it has this end tag which looks like a start tag, except it has a slash. So it's a very simple structure. It has a little bit of semantics. We know that this is a headline because it has the H in it. That you had to know, kind of, but it's easy. Once you've learned it, you don't forget it. So it has some semantics. It's independent of the media. It doesn't say anything about whether it should be on a screen or should be printed or it should be read out loud to somebody who cannot see. It's also an open standard. That's also a fundamental feature, which made it possible for CERN to distribute this to everyone for free. You didn't need a license. You didn't need to sign anything. You could just go ahead and implement. So that Mark Andreessen at the NCSA in Illinois could create his browser. So if you go outside the CERN laboratory, you see some of the world's most beautiful landscapes. I think it's only challenged by what we're seeing around us here. This is also incredibly beautiful, and I'm so glad the organizers found this place. This is slightly different. It's more mountainous. This is a picture of Mont Blanc. CERN itself is underneath the ground here. We don't see much of that. But it's really, truly stunningly beautiful. I'm sure all of you would agree to that. And this is, the human perception. We are made to see these beautiful things. We're very visually oriented. If I turn the camera around here, I come to the Jura Mountains, another mountain chain. This is taken in May of 1994, when it was, snow-capped. We have cows grazing in the field. I don't think the cows know much about what goes on underneath them. That might be just as good. But it's a beautiful picture. So this is also why, when designers came to the web, they wanted to say something about aesthetics. They wanted to say something about colors, typography. We have a long 500-year-old tradition in printed typography in the Western world. And all cultures have, drawings. They express themselves by making things look beautiful. And HTML didn't provide for that. HTML was written by researchers to organize text, to create a structured document, which it's very good at. But we needed something else. And instead of extending HTML, I proposed to create a new language. I didn't want to ruin the good things about HTML. I didn't want to replace H1 with something else. I wanted to add something to it so we could say H1, use the font size that the author or user wants. Use a color. It's also a very simple language. No programming is needed here. So it's very conscious to not make CSS into a programming language. Just like HTML, it's declarative. Programmers, there are many programmers in the audience, I know. To be a good programmers, you have to be really smart. Most people aren't really smart. Most people aren't good programmers. I thought I was the world's best programmer once. I found out I'm not. But this is a language that I think most people who has a little bit of background in maybe desktop publishing or such can understand those lines of code without learning something new. So this is media dependent, though. It's tied to a visual presentation, what we're seeing here. So CSS sort of takes over some of those roles that we didn't want to change HTML to have into. I think the alternative, if CSS hadn't been developed, I think people would have started using images for text much more than we saw. Because if you use an image, a JPEG or a GIF or PNG, then you have control over every pixel. And we saw quite a bit of that. People wanted to do headlines in a certain font. They made an image out of it. Adobe sold a lot of Photoshop packages because people wanted to do text shadows before CSS could do that. So there was a risk for a while that people would turn the web into a giant fax machine. Remember fax machines? Yeah? You scan a document, you take a picture of a document, and you send that picture over, and then you can print it out. But you need to have a pair of human eyes to read what's there. You cannot index it easily. You can do some OCRing maybe, but it's error prone. So we could have had the web become sort of like a web of GIF images with text in it, which is not the good thing. It's much better to keep HTML as a textual language, and then we do the presentations in the side with CSS. So we sat down and added, what are the properties we need here? What's most important? Font size, very basic. Font style, font family. These things important to do. Setting borders. Setting colors of borders. I tell you, in 1995 when this came out, this was hot stuff, being able to set the color of a border, and doing different styles. We had long arguments about what kind of styles we should have. So here was text shadow, which I mentioned. It was part of the first CSS specification in 1996, but it wasn't implemented in IE, so people didn't really use it. So I'm using a browser here, of course, and I can select the text. So you see it's real text behind, but the presentation has a shadow-like appearance. And like I said, Adobe sold a lot of copies of Photoshop for people to do this, but it's always wrong to put, or 99.9% of the time it's wrong to put text into images, because then you lose indexability, you lose the ability to read it out loud to a sight-impaired person, etc. You want to keep the text as text. And you can do incredible things once you have that text shadow. You can do incredible things with it by adding a few parameters. So this is the text shadow property. This is the CSS code. So the simplest example is just to say, two coordinates, x, y, and then you set a color. You get a solid black shadow. If you want it a little more, softer on the edges, you can add another parameter, and then you can add a more advanced color representation. This is RGB. This is a little hard to explain. F79. It's not obvious that turns into this salmon red color, but I think that's one of the toughest points in CSS. Once you get past that, you can do a lot. Again, adding more, making sort of a spray paint-like appearance. We never really thought of this when we started doing text shadows, but once you see, people create incredible things. Once you give them some tools, they find out new ways to do this. And I'm proud to see that there's CSS art has become its own category in the history of art. Border radius. I was not very excited about adding border radius. Remember, there's always a limit to how much you can do. You have to concentrate on a few things in order to get this implemented by all browsers roughly at the same time. And I said, maybe we shouldn't do border radius. I'm not sure people really want border radius. It looks kind of like the 1960s stuff, doesn't it? 1970s, perhaps. We're kind of past that point, aren't we? Well, it turned out I was wrong. It was a lot of people who wanted to do rounded borders on their web pages and on products. So in the end, I'm actually glad I lost that battle. I'm very happy that we have border radius with us. And also here, you can see just by changing a few parameters, it's not really obvious what that slash means, but once you see that, you get this visual effect, then you can do that. And by adding a few more parameters, a few more values there, you can set border radius on only some of the corners. So, this is just visual fluff. Google will not index the document any differently, whether it has this border or that border. But to the human eye, it's very important. We see these things right away. And therefore, I think it's important to give designers the kind of tools that they're longing for. And then we can't really tell what they'll use it for. I'm probably using it for truly incredibly bad stuff here, but being able to set linear gradients, we see it when done right on a web page. It looks very, very nice. It looks very smooth. So I'm very happy to see the kind of stuff that people have been using, much better than my examples here. A lot of our time went into not just, coming up with specifications and arguing about properties, but it went into testing those properties to make sure they looked the same. We had browsers from Netscape, Microsoft, Opera, Firefox, Safari. And one of the great things about W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, is that developers from all these organizations can come together, sit around the same table, actually, have a good time together. These are people interested in browsers and typography and stuff. So we can fight a little bit about what is the right interpretation, but in the end, we can all see that something is right and something is wrong here, and that something needs to be fixed. And we also had good support from the Web Standards Project. This was kind of a grassroots organization that was started by authors, actually, who said, we're spending too much time trying to work around browser bugs. We'd like for all the browsers to fix their problems. And I joined in that campaign. I was working for Opera. I was the CTO of Opera for 18 years. But I still was an activist on the side for CSS, of course. And when Bill Gates said that they would launch a new version of IE7, we created this test page, Asset 2. Remember, this was at a time when IE6 had not been updated for 4 years. They had 90% of the users out there. It was dominated by IE6. And IE6 had such limitations that there were large chunks of the CSS specification that couldn't be used. Or if you tried to use it, you ended up with some weird Microsoft-esque behavior. So we developed this page called the Asset 2, which looks very simple. We can all see that this is a smiley face and it looks right. But behind every pixel here, there's a very difficult test. And in order to get that pixel in the right place, in the right color, you need to actually follow the specification. And when the Asset 2 was launched, all browsers had problems with it, including Opera, even though I had helped launch this. This was kind of a sort of a secret campaign to make the Opera developers follow standards too, right? It's a sort of a guerrilla technique to make the web become a better place. Okay, so this is IE6. And you can kind of see that it's a face there. It's not so happy. Well, it has these two eyes, right? Can we see? Let's see if we can. Can we do the? Well, okay, I'm pointing. You can see the two eyes here, right? Okay, the nose is gone, but there is a mouth. And then there's something dripping here. Doesn't look so nice, right? So there's obviously room for improvement. So we thought, okay, now that we've really shown Microsoft, you have a problem, they're going to fix it. So when IE7 came out, about a year later, we all ran to install it and to test it. And this is what it looked like. And, are there some improvements here? Not really. There are two eyes, and maybe this is actually a nose. So yes, maybe there is a little improvement, but the nose has a funny scroll bar on it, and that doesn't look right to me. And if you look at the mouth, the dripping here is even worse. So we were wondering, is this going the right way or not? Maybe Microsoft is too big. Maybe they are dominating. Maybe they don't really care about standards. And then a lot of people got upset, and they said, we don't want to live in this world. We want Microsoft and all the others to follow standards. So they stood up in conferences and they asked questions. When are you going to fix, the Asset 2 test? And incredibly, when IE8 was launched, this is what it looks like. I think that was due to the campaign not by me or W3C. This was due to a lot of people like yourself. You know, when in the conference you're asked, are there any questions? And somebody at the back raised their hand and shouts out, when are you going to do ACID 2 to the Microsoft presenters? That's a lot of power. So Microsoft has changed. Now, actually, they've changed their whole rendering engine, of course. So this is not a done deal yet. But all browsers support ACID 2. They follow basic web standards. OK, so let's move on a little bit and look at some of the other things in CSS. Web fonts came in also very early. Microsoft, one of the great things, I'm talking a lot about Microsoft. Microsoft's both good and bad. And one of the great things about Microsoft is that they launched these fonts for free to use. This was in the 90s. You know, fonts there weren't that many of them. Microsoft had paid to develop these fonts. I'm sure you know all of them. And if you did do something in the 90s on a computer screen, you probably read your text using one of these fonts. And they donated these fonts to everyone so that Linux could use them, Mac could use them. So these were generally available. But at the time, there comes a time when, you know, you want more than that. So supporting web fonts was important. One of the designers who understood very early that he could distribute fonts on the web was Dieter Steffmann, a German. So he made these fonts and put them available, made them available for free for everyone to use. So nowadays, it's very easy to point to a font out there, a TrueType file, and the browser will download it temporarily and install it, and you can use it on your pages. I wouldn't maybe, you know, the next novel you publish, you probably don't want to typeset it in broadcast titling, but maybe for the title, you know, maybe for the front page you could use this. It's not very readable for other than that. So this is very visual. But it also has an important side to making the World Wide Web truly worldwide. Because in 2011, Wikipedia started using web fonts in India. Many of the Indic scripts don't have great support in the operating system, or at least they used to not have that. I'm not sure. Maybe that could have improved by now. But in any way, the Wikipedia folks started using web fonts to make sure that all the Indic scripts could render Wikipedia pages. So that if the computer the person we're using didn't have the right font, those were downloaded. And fonts are very compressed information, so the download speed didn't suffer much. And once you had it downloaded, you could use it for other pages too, of course. So that was a real benefit of using CSS to improve access to information throughout the world. Another good thing that we didn't have from the start was animations. And I'm now actually going to break the Norwegian law by doing this. By hovering over this image, I make the state symbol of Norway turn. And that's actually against the law. It says that the state symbol should be at the top of the page. It is. It should be in the middle of the page, centered. It is. And it should be standing straight up. And it didn't for a while. You saw that, right? For 1 second, that lion was moving. And if I hover it out, it would go back again. And I'm sure if I asked you to change this code, you know, make the lion spin the other way around, you would know which character to remove here to make that happen. You know? It's so easy. It's all declarative. You, of course, just remove the minus there, and you get another spin, so to say. All right, let's go on. I'm going to talk a little bit about this World Wide Web thing and how it got to be used by everyone. At Opera, we developed browsers for mobile phones very early. And one of the products was Opera Mini, which compressed the data in the servers so that on the phone, you didn't really run a full browser. You ran an app that could display a compressed version. It meant that we could save about 80% of the data of a web page could be compressed in the data servers that we had running in Oslo first and then throughout the world. So when this first was launched, we had some interesting articles come out from Chicago. In Chicago, they were early, their bus system had a very early GPS tracking system, and you could see online, in 2009, you could see online where all the buses were. And some journalists got access to this system and even access to the logs. So they checked, where are the people who are tracking the buses in Chicago? And they found that, incredibly, that Norway was #1. So these articles wrote, Norwegians are either just utterly fascinated with the comings and goings of CTA buses, or there just aren't enough recreational activities in the land of fjords and Viking ships. So what these journalists actually didn't understand was that the people checking these buses, they weren't actually Norwegians. These were actually people freezing in Chicago, but they had a mobile phone in their pocket. And that mobile phone had Opera Mini installed. And they made a request, where's my bus? And Opera Mini called home, which is Norway, our server farm in the basement, and from there checked the CTA buses. So it looked like the server logs, this was all coming from Norway. And that tells us geography is changing here. Once you have access to the internet and the web in your pocket, you can be just about anywhere. And we see some interesting numbers, because we had these Opera Mini servers, so we could see where people were, not exactly where they were, but in which country they were, which phone they were using, which telecoms provider they were having. And we had a strong growth of this around the year 2009. We made the internet available to a lot of people who would otherwise not have it for bandwidth reason, or because they didn't have an iPhone. They couldn't afford an iPhone. They had a Nokia phone. So we had people throughout the world who would use Opera Mini for this. So I'm going to do a little quiz just to keep you awake here. Which country is this? In the top of the statistics, Opera Mini users. Which country is this? Russia. Yeah, that was an easy one because it says Russia here, right? Okay. So this is the top 10 countries. Okay, what's the second one? Indonesia, very good. And this one? India, you got that too. And now? Ukraine? China? South Africa, very good. It's not Zambia. Many people think Zambia. Nigeria, excellent. Vietnam? US, good. You heard of US? Yes. Brazil. Okay, you're doing great. Okay, we'll continue. Belarus, good. That's a difficult one. UK, you can do that. Turkey, Kazakhstan, excellent. Philippines, Poland, Kenya, yes. Egypt, Bangladesh, Germany, yes. You were almost as good as the second grade in Kiev that I talked to this about a few weeks ago. But it shows, I mean, this is absolute number. It's not per capita numbers. But it shows that, the web is used by many, not only in rich Western countries. It's used throughout the world. And Egypt is a particularly interesting example. Egypt beats Germany here, and maybe there's a reason for that. Because we saw this when they had the revolution in Egypt. Here's the statistics. We're seeing Opera Mini usage in Egypt. It's, not great, but it's there. And then suddenly, the revolution starts. This is 2011, if I remember correctly. And we see a strong growth, suddenly, Opera Mini usage. We think this is due to people, the TV maybe, they don't trust the TV news, they don't trust state-run news, etc. We're seeing a very strong growth of internet use, because they have Opera Mini installed. And then suddenly it goes black. This is due to the internet being turned off by the government. It stays down for 3 days, and then it comes back again. Why it was turned off, why it came back, I don't know. What we're seeing is that the usage stabilizes at a much higher level afterwards. So once people get to know that they can use the web, they continue using it. And this was 2011, so this is a few years back. But it still remains, in many places of the planet, it's not obvious that you pick up your phone and do it. But I think it's showing that this will, whenever there is a crisis, we will turn to electronic communication. And therefore, it is very important that we make those services accessible to all, that we make the code be good looking. for the eyes and for the browser. So I have 6 minutes left, 5 minutes left. I'd like to show a few things that are now available in CSS that I think are really cool. First, the viewport unit, VW. Some people think this was a sponsorship, that Volkswagen actually sponsored this unit. That's not the case. The viewport unit actually makes it possible to set the font size be relative to the width of the window there. So that I'm not using any JavaScript or anything to change that font size. That just happens automatically by setting the VW. I mentioned Volkswagen. They didn't sponsor, but there is a very cool page showing how you can do a Volkswagen bus. Remember this Volkswagen bus? It's almost as charming as the food trucks we have here. So this is all done with div elements and CSS, including the animations. So now we're firmly in the CSS art category, where you can just do stuff with CSS that we never planned to do. Very cool. Okay. I'm going to pass quickly. One of the things I think maybe we haven't done right, maybe we've done a little too much work here in layout models, actually. If we take simple page of div elements again and try to format it in different ways, we find out there's actually 6, some say 7 ways of laying out the elements in this particular way. We have absolute positioning, we have table layout, we have flexbox, we have column layout, there's grid, and there's float. There's 6 different layout models, which may be too complex. I don't know if you're using these. If you're the advanced CSS developers, you probably know a bunch of these, and you probably have a favorite. I don't know if we should try to combine them or take one out, or we shouldn't try to make more of them. It's at a level now. But I would like to show you a page. This is my apple farm. I promised you pictures from my apple farm. So this is a page that's using multi-column layout to lay out these very scenic pictures and some text here. So all the layout here is done with multi-columns. And you can, I'm not going to go through the code line by line, but I'll show you the effect, which I think is very nice. Because you can set the column width to be a length unit, which means that the number of columns will change. Did you see that? That transition from 3 to 4 and down to 2 columns, right? And all the way down to 1. So you get a very adaptable design without doing any work. Again, there's no JavaScript or any media queries even involved in this. This is all done just by setting the optimal width of the line, and the browser will create the number of columns necessary to fulfill that. So I think if you want to look at something new in CSS, maybe you should try multi-column layout. I also think CSS has the potential to do a lot of print publishing. We do write books. We like paper still, right? We have a bookshelf. We don't probably buy as many paper books as before, but we want to have some. So there will be a workshop later today where I'll be talking about how to publish a book using CSS. So I'll show some tricks there. I have a few seconds left. Just mention, on the topic of books, this was the first book printed, Gutenberg, 1460s, Germany. Probably still the most beautiful book ever published. It's it's hard to read. It's Latin, and the font is barely readable, but it's still, the layout is very beautiful with 2 columns and the ornaments. And he basically invented many of the punctuations that we use today, like the hyphens and things. He was an incredible inventor, Mr. Gutenberg himself. And he lived about 500 years ago, and we still know how to use his book. If we had a Gutenberg Bible here today, we would know how to, basically the same metaphor as we're still using. So my hypothesis is that the code that we write today will also be readable in 500 years. All right? Think about that. It's going to live longer than you. Make sure that the code you write is that you're proud of it, that the people, in 500 years will say, wow, he was really great. That's it? That's it, is it? Okay, I would have continued. Should I do, 2 seconds? I was on a raft. I know you're going to have a raft competition here today, is it? Yeah? I had my raft experience in the Pacific in 2015. I was on this Kon-Tiki 2 voyage. We tried to follow up what Kon-Tiki, the raft, did in 1947. Then they sailed into Polynesia. We were going to sail to Easter Island, and we reached Easter Island in 43 days. And I was the CTO on board, so I made sure that we had an internet connection there. Here's my Iridium. Talks to satellites 600 kilometers up, so we could blog from here. We could show the path where we're going. We could tell the news, etc. The last thing I'm going to do is show the marketing campaign for Opera. Okay, so Opera sponsored this, which is why I was there. And, I took pictures and I Twittered along the way, right? We had a product called Opera Max. This was to maximize the throughput on your phone. So I posted it and people say, nah, Håkon, that's really, really false advertising. Well, okay, so I had to correct it. So the next day I posted the Opera Mini. Thank you so much.